Hello, good evening. I'm John. I'm a member of the Arlington Bars Club History Group, and I'll be chairing this evening's session. Welcome. Don't forget to put in your comments and questions in the chat window, which should be down at the side there. We'd like plenty of interaction, so lots of questions and comments, please. This evening's session is not going to be formal presentations. We've got a panel discussion instead. So I'll introduce the panel to you just now. So here we are, going clockwise. I've introduced myself. I'm John. Kay, Lucy.
Hello.
Eunice. And Will.
Hello.
So the plan is we're going to do a little launch of the walking tour that we've set up as part of the Glasgow Doors Open Days digital festival. I'll take you through the app and show you how to find us on the app for those who haven't already downloaded it or explored. Once we've done that, we'll go back to the panel and we'll chat a little bit about the history group at the Arlington, what we do, and what projects we've been investigating. We'll talk a little bit about the tour and perhaps talk about some of the people who don't feature on the tour. The walking tour is specifically about founders of the Arlington Bars Club back in 1870. So we're celebrating our 150th anniversary this year.
All right.
Somebody's phone.
Yep. That's bound to happen. Phones and fire alarms, pets and children and so on. So,
And ABC.
yeah. Okay. Let's just have a look in the chat window. Oh, we've only got one comment. Oh no, we've got a couple of comments here. Good vibes.
That's all.
From Carla Starbabe. Don't forget to say where you're coming from, whereabouts in the world you are, because for all we know, you might be from the States or East Asia or Australia. So do say where you're from, and it'll give us an idea of the audience that we've got at back home. Okay, I'll see if we can get this to work now. I'm going to show you the app. So I'll flick over to here, and with a bit of luck, if I can get my phone going. Oops, don't want to show you all my messages. I'll just clear those. Right. Okay, so
A
bit out of focus.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there we go.
How's that?
All good.
I'll just take Carla Starbabe off for now. Oh, we've got Bothwell. Excellent. Outside Glasgow. Not too far outside Glasgow, though. And our chairman, Gordon.
Hello, Gordon. So,
the app that we've created the walk on, so it's a walk that you can do yourselves, obviously. So you download the app from the App Store if you're on iPhone, or Google Play Store if you're on Android. So once you've done that and installed the app, it's Greedy Go. So open it up, and if it's the first time you've used it, you need to find us. So you can either type in Arlington Bars Club or Arlington Bars in the search window, or you can explore a map of the local area and pick on us there. Or if it realizes where you are then and you're local to Glasgow, then it may bring up some suggestions. So we're just there, obviously. Just in passing, a very quiet street is just around the corner from us, West Princes Street and Queen's Crescent. And that's an excellent walk that's been devised by Louise Welsh and Zoe Strachan. So thoroughly recommend that. You could tie the two walks in together. I don't think it's too much of a giveaway to say that the question mark in a very quiet street is a clue. So once you've downloaded the app, you come to the Arlington Bars Club. There's a little summary there, and click on open, and it produces the map of the, oops, if we can focus that. There we go. The map of the walk. So the Arlington, start at number 1, which is at the Arlington. So click on that. And then you can press play.
To the Arlington Baths Club 150th anniversary walk. The Arlington Baths is a private club which is owned and run by its members. I'm Eunice.
So for each of the stops on the walk, you get a few pictures, a story about the background of the baths and the founding members. So the walk is about the founders of the baths, how it all originated, who they were, what they were about, and how the baths was paid for. So just come out of there and okay, bring back the panel. Great. So maybe we should start with the history group at the Arlington, and the best person to talk about that, I think, is Lucy, who's our chairperson of the history group.
Chairperson makes it sound a bit grand, but
kicked it off originally. So tell us a bit about the history group and who we are and what we do.
Yeah, well, I would say, it's quite informal. So those, John said chairperson, we're a collective, really, a loose collective of people that are interested in the history of the Arlington Baths. So we started back in, I think it was late 2016. And people who are sort of in the group have different interests. So it's largely around what people's interests are. They will do a bits of research, try and find out more about the building, about some of the people. We had a project towards the sort of the anniversary of the First World War, towards the end of the war, to look at some of the members on the war memorial. And then as part of the kind of work that we've been doing, we've produced various resources. So one thing is a leaflet. You can see a copy here, probably backwards. But so that's one of the leaflets that we use when we actually do Doors Open Day, and we are actually able to get people into the baths. This is one of the things that we can give them. It's got a wee summary of some of the important bits of history of the baths. And we've also got a blog. So we publish whenever we've got something, we found out something new, we've got a new story, we found some new information, we're able to publish that on the website. So everything that we know so far is kind of collated there, and hopefully we'll have more and more stories as we carry on. But it's been brilliant to be involved, and it's really interesting to see the different kind of stories that people find, the different resources that people have found. People have found archive materials on the internet, in other archives, in libraries and museums, and there's always new things to find. So it's been really wonderful to kind of to track down some of these materials. And we've also had people sort of occasionally getting in touch as well to tell us about things that, or share some of their memories. And that's something that we're keen to do more of as well, is to make contact with members, to hear sort of recollections, to record some of these recollections, and make sure so we don't lose some of the really kind of precious memories that people have of the community of the Arlington Baths, and be able to share that with the wider city. That's really important to us as well, because the Baths has been there for 150 years. People who have been members over the years are people who were the great and good of the city, but also, the ordinary people of the city. And it's just, it's been a community for that long. It's been a community for 150 years, and it's still a community now. And it's really wonderful to be able to sort of trace that and to see how all of these people contributed to the city and contributed to Glasgow, and where they came from and where they went afterwards. And I think we'll touch on a wee bit of that when we're looking at some of the founders in today's chat, and also on the walk as well.
So let's chat a little bit about the walk, but not in too much detail, because we don't want to give too much away. There were some interesting themes that came out. Eunice.
Yes. Well, the walk was a bit of a challenge, because Lucy and I attended a meeting with the Doors Open Day people, and investigating ways that we could celebrate Doors Open Day this year, which we thought was particularly important given that it was the club's 150th anniversary. So I sat down to look through all the blogs to see if there was a walk around the area of Bath that told any particular story. And I was particularly looking at two things: where the founders had lived, and where there were other buildings by the same architect as the Bath, because there were lots and lots of building going on around the area of the Baths at the same time as the Baths were being built. And that whole area was developing from about 1820s onwards. And I was astonished to find that I could find many of the founders at some point in their lives relatively close to the Baths, and making a sort of reasonable walk. So that was the first thing, and we actually got 10 of them onto the walk. And when I rechecked the blogs a couple of days ago, I realised there was 2 more I could have fitted in if I'd actually noticed them the first time I went through. But all I was doing was building on the work that everybody else in the team has done over the last 2 or 3 years, and particularly in the last few months, trying to pin down as much as we could about all of the people who were involved in the founding of the Bath. And there were 7 who were directors of the Glasgow Swimming Bath Company, which was the parent body, and then there were another 8 in addition to them, because those 7 were all on the first management committee. There were another 8, so 15 in all, who were active in some way in 1870, 1871 in the founding of the Baths. And there's a whole lot of themes that tie them together. And I think actually maybe Kay might be better at talking about at least one of the major themes that we found.
I think we did expect that there would be links between them, that they probably maybe had gone to school together, had been at the same university, perhaps involved in the same profession. But I think we were all surprised just how many of them were involved in textiles. I think when we look back at the history of Glasgow and think about the money that was in the city at that time, you tend to think of tobacco and sugar as being the source of a lot of the wealth for the city. But the textile industry, and particularly Calico printing industry, was an important area of activity too. And I think what stunned us all really was the number of the founder members who had connections with the Calico printing trade. I don't know if anybody wants to speak about any individual printing company, but I think one of the most interesting one was Dalgleish and Faulkner, and I'm looking at you, Will, and see if you want to say a little bit more about them.
Yeah, so Robert Dalgleish was quite important to the club in that he was the chairman for the first 48 years. The company itself was based up in Lennoxtown, and if you go up to Lennoxtown now and see the library, you can actually see a kind of homage to the Calico printing industry. There's a vinyl print on the window of the library. It was quite an influential family, and that his dad was Robert Dalgleish Senior, was a Lord Provost of the city and an MP previously. So there's obviously a bit of money there to begin with. I think that's kind of, they were living, was a big family living in a cottage up in Lennoxtown, but they had more servants than they had family at the time. So it couldn't have been a very small cottage, I think. But certainly the Calico printers seem to be, was to me also the biggest surprise. I mean, as someone's father who was a shipbuilder, I was kind of expecting more the sort of building ships, building men image of Glasgow to come through rather than, you know, printing their way to fortunes. So that was really quite a surprise at the time. And Robert Dalgleish did very well for his family. I think you'd agree, Kay, when they ended up out Mulgai way as well. So
Huge house out that way.
Yeah. So
I wonder if we could talk a little bit about what is Calico and what does the printing process involve?
Well, Calico obviously is a textile which was originally from Calicut, beg your pardon, in Kerala in India, and it was brought over initially to this country, I think, really through the East India Company, and became very popular. People were intrigued by this cotton fabric or cotton-based fabric with very colourful printing on it, and it actually became quite a big issue. It became a threat really to local textile production in this country, so that you know, the woolen manufacturers and linen manufacturers really felt under threat. So even as early as 1700, there were acts in place to try and prevent the import of calico, or certainly of printed calico. You could import plain grey calico, which they thought would have no interest or no market, no ready market in the country. But obviously people then devised a method of printing. And actually that was really where Glasgow's side of the textile trade really took off in time. And the Turkey red industry, which was very much centred in the Vale of Leven, became really, really important and a huge employer in the area. And certainly there were quite a number of the founders were involved in printing, not just Dalgleish. There was the gentleman that you researched, John, is it Higginsbottom?
James Samuel Higginbottom.
Higginbottom, sorry. And the Boyles. There were quite a number of the founders were involved in that trade. Yeah.
And Turkey red, that's a sort of strange concept. What's the story with that?
Well, it was from the madder was really the source of the dye, madder root. And it became known as Turkey red because people thought that it came from Turkey, or the colour came from Turkey. It actually, you know, it came from the East generally. But it was quite a complicated process. It used all sorts of revolting, smelly things like stale, rancid oil, ox blood, etc., as part of the process to actually you know, get the dye to set. But it's something that they developed a great skill in quite early on in this area, in Glasgow area, and it became very much associated with the Turkey red industry. And in fact, there was a very interesting project called Colouring the Nation that was sponsored through the National Museum a few years ago, involving Sally Tuckett, who I think is giving a talk later on in the Doors Open Day Festival about textiles. She talks about turkey red, and that's a wonderful illustration of turkey red dye. Thank you, John. Perfect. That's one of the early Arlington ladies' swimming costumes, which was coloured with turkey red. Another fine example of the sort of patterns that they produced. I mean, originally it was done. It was hand printed. It was either painted onto the fabric and then in time hand printed in wooden blocks. And then over time, actually, in Glasgow in 1738, Thomas Bell invented a cylinder rolling press, which was a way of actually printing the fabric on a rolling metal press. And that was really quite innovative. This is a wonderful Stephen Adam window from Mary Hill Borough Hall. Mary Hill Borough Hall showing the Calico printers. It's a great picture. Thank you for that.
And that was the innovation that Robert Buckley did, wasn't it? They had a special technique where they mechanised the printing of the wooden block. And so they were able to get a much greater throughput of... That's right,
yeah. That's a step change in production when they were able to go from block printing to roller printing. But what I find very interesting is that for quite a long while, the two printing forms that have overlapped, and particularly in, I think it was the Rentons did quite a lot of sari fabric, and they used the roller for the body of the pattern, but they still used blocks for the edge to make, the decorative end to the sari. So, the printing techniques overlapped. It wasn't simply that one day they stopped doing block printing and moved on to just roller printing. It did continue side by side for some time.
Of course, the hand printing technique they pretty well stolen wholeheartedly from India.
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, we basically destroyed the textile trade in India, then printed the fabrics for saris, etc., and exported it back to India. It's absolutely appalling. It's part of the East India Company legacy.
So that was one link between the founders. The other link that we found was the local volunteer militia.
Yes.
Many of them were involved in what would be the equivalent today of the territorial army or the reserves in 1860s, 1870s. There was huge concern about the French, Napoleon III adventurism and expanding, first of all into Italy, but there was concern that Britain might come under attack. And so the reserve forces were built up, and several of our founders were officers in the local Lanarkshire artillery volunteers and the engineer volunteers as well.
I think one merged into the other. One of them was knighted for his services to the volunteers, Brigadier General Sir Donald Matheson. He was the most senior, and then F.W. Allen, who was another very staunch member, he was a major. Weems Orrock, I can't remember what rank he got to. I think he got to sort of major as well. And they were the only three we definitely, yes, this is Donald Matheson. And this portrait still hangs somewhere in a hall in
Rankin Street, I think.
Yeah.
Rankin Street near the Kelvin.
Yes, I think it's near Kelvin Bridge, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it's just off Kelvin Bridge because I walked past it. It's not on the walk, but it's slightly off the walk. So yes, he was quite a character. And then there was another of the founders who we don't know much about, until he died. But he died in Calcutta, where he had gone, I think, sometime in the 1870s and set up a company, I think, with his brother, Thomas Steele Anderson. And the description of his funeral in Calcutta is replete with this military ceremony, because he was a member of the Calcutta Light Horse. And so he was accorded a military funeral, which was attended by everybody who was anybody, including the Lieutenant Governor.
So we should maybe go to the chat window to bring up some of the questions and comments. Gordon asks, how can other members share their stories?
Well, there are around the club. There are some forms which you can make me notes in if you wish, and hand those in at the office, or just speak to Andrew in the office, or drop an email to the club and they'll pass it on to us. I'm trying to remember actually if we've got an email address on the blog. If not, then we should do, and I'll make sure that's there. So just, through the office at the pool, or try and get hold of any of the members of the history group. We'll also, once we can, we'll try and institute regular meetings again. And basically, as I say, we're a very loose kind of group, so anybody can come along to those. So if you wanted to pop into one of those meetings and just get to meet people and then sort of have a chat and see whether you wanted to either get involved or just kind of share some of those stories from the past that may be in danger of being lost, then that would be great as well. So so please just drop us an email, speak to Andrew at the club, or look out for the posters once things are getting back to a more normal situation. So, but yeah, we're delighted to hear from you. So
yeah, I think
sorry, Kate.
I was just going to say we're always keen to get some photographs of, particularly of the Turkish, earlier photographs of the Turkish suite, or of members wearing the original costumes provided by the club. That would be fantastic if anybody has any in their family.
Yep, memoirs and stories and photographs, particularly letters, any memorabilia. Marion is saying, now I think I presume this refers back to the Calico printing. Is there a library of documented designs anywhere in Glasgow or elsewhere for that matter?
A good place to start would actually be to look online at the, I'll get the correct title, Colouring the Nation, Turkey Red in Scotland, which was a project that I referred to that the National Museum was involved with a few years ago. And there's quite a lot available online, and that refers to places where you can actually see some of the Calico designs in the flesh, so to speak. Yeah.
The walk concentrated on members who stayed in pretty close proximity to the baths. The furthest field on the walk is down just off Sauchiehall Street. But we did have founding members from a bit further afield who didn't make it onto the walk. Many of them from the city centre, others from even further afield, north of the city. Would anyone like to pick that up?
Well, yeah, there's one that I've got a fondness for. Who he doesn't really make it onto the walk, I don't think. Is Robert Peel Lamond, who it's not absolutely certain, but we presume he's probably named after Robert Peel, the Prime Minister, because his father was involved in when Robert Peel, in between being Prime Minister, he was also rector of Glasgow University. And in 1837, he came to Glasgow to accept his rectorship, and it was a jamboree for a couple of days in the city, and they had like banquets and festivals and speeches and all this kind of thing. And Robert Lamond was senior, was involved in organising that banquet. And then a few years later, Robert Peel Lamond, who was our founder, was born. So we assume that probably, he was named after to Robert Peel as being his kind of political hero, his father's political hero. And he became a lawyer. Robert Peel Lamond became a lawyer. He was, and he wrote a couple of books about the poor laws, which was the way that kind of sort of welfare was delivered by local authorities or by cities and principality, sort of local government in Britain at the time. So he was interested in kind of like social reform, and he claims that some of his ideas were taken up by Parliament, who were reforming the poor laws at the time. And there were connections. You can see connections between him or his family and Robert Dalgleish, who we mentioned earlier, and his family, who were involved in politics in the city. I think he's an interesting character in his own right, but it's also quite interesting the way that you can see some of these kind of connections between the families. Robert Lamond was involved in campaigning for Robert Dalgleish, who was the MP. And you can see some of these connections throughout all of the founders, actually, which is really interesting. So they were maybe involved in businesses together. I think one of the founders married Thomas Steele Anderson's sister.
Yes, I was trying to remember which one was
Robert Dalgleish pops up as he worked with Augusta Schwab, who was the mother of Sebastian Schwab, who was one of our founders, and they worked together to set up a workplace nursery, or a kind of nursery for working mothers, which was one of the first kind of public nurseries, in the city, and I presume probably in Scotland. So you can kind of start, once you start looking at the stories in detail, you start to spot all these connections between all these people, which is really interesting to just kind of get that sense of how they all knew each other, and they would interact, and they would be members of the same organisations, including like the Arlington Baths. And be involved in political campaigning together. It's interesting to see how it all fitted together.
I thought one thing that was quite interesting as well, the work you did, Eunice, looking at how old they all were at the time of the fund. Actually they were all fairly young, and I think the eldest one was about 40. So they were all roughly of an age. Also, I think what is quite interesting is quite a lot of them, not so much Peel Lamond, but a lot of them were sort of second generation or third generation in the family business. So I suppose in a way they were young, but they were wealthy, and they weren't really sort of pushing to get the business established. So they'd maybe a bit more free time to get involved in founding something like the Arlington. So that was an interesting observation as well. And was it Peel Lamond, Lucy, that went bankrupt?
Yes, I believe. Yeah, that's right. Yes, in the collapse of the city of Glasgow Bank, which was kind of terrible for a lot of people.
Yeah, that was something I expected would have come through more. I think I said that before, that that I expected that would have affected more of the founders and more of the members in 1878 when the city of Glasgow Bank collapsed, and it did have a huge repercussions to the city, but obviously the members on the whole still seem to ride through it quite successfully.
The ones we know of so far, anyway. So I think there was someone else. Was it Weems Oric Bully, who was also, was it his father was involved with the bank, which went bust as well a wee bit earlier?
Yes.
So, it's kind of
and one of the Sloans was tangentially involved in the collapse, wasn't he?
Not so much in the collapse, Eunice, but what happened was he would have normally gone to the bank to borrow money for his own personal debts, and couldn't because the banks weren't lending any money following the collapse. So he actually went to one of the clients and made out that the money was needed for the firm when it was actually for his personal debts. And then he had to confess to his brother and was exposed. Yeah.
So we've got a question. Sorry, we've got a question here from Alan Jones saying, do we have any plans to present the information in an exhibition? or on the website. Apologies if this has already been addressed here. No apologies necessary, Alan.
No, not at all. Please ask all the questions. So all of these stories. Well, obviously, there's some in the app for the walking tour. But all of the stories are also on the website, along with some of the other things, like some of the people who are on the war memorial. And various other, there's our member who swam in the 1924 Olympic Games, for example. There's the information about the visit of the world's greatest dancer in the 1970s to the Baths. You may have seen some of that in the Herald recently or in the media. It's Rudolf Nureyev visited the Arlington Baths in 1975. All of these stories are there on our blog, which you can find either from the Arlington Baths website. There's a link there, or the web address is arlingtonbathshistory.wordpress.com.
Yeah, I'll put that in the comments section.
I think Warren had asked something as well about challenges to in the research.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, so I mean, other members can talk. Other members of the history group here will be able to talk about the challenges. I mean, there are obviously we're volunteers, so sometimes it's hard to find the time, especially when like some of the stuff is so fascinating. You get so caught up with it, and it's really hard to stop, but you've got to go to work, you know. So some of that could be quite tricky, just kind of balancing it all with other things. And obviously, sometimes it's a wee bit hard. Sometimes to find stuff, and it can get a bit frustrating because you're really trying to track down information about somebody. And one of the things here is you will notice that the founders, they were all men, but we've tried quite hard to try and find out information about their families as well, because women were members of the Baths and children were members of the Baths. So there are you get wee bits and pieces about some of the women as well. I mentioned Augusta Schwab, who was the mother of one of the founders. We've also got wee bits of information about some of the wives who were involved in sort of various organisations in the city, and obviously got involved in things and did things as well. You know, it is harder to find out about some of their lives.
Except to say that there's actually a fantastic archive of the ladies. The ladies were a separate group within the Baths, formed very soon after the Baths were founded.
Oops, we've got a bit of feedback here.
Oh, are we all right?
Sounds okay to me, but
yeah, we okay, John? Shall I go on?
Yes, carry on, Eunice. Sorry.
So basically, the archive of the women's section is very rich, because although they didn't have anything to do with running the Baths, they had lots to do with encouraging I will say ladies, because they were definitely ladies and they called themselves ladies. Keeping the ladies section active, and they ran swimming galas from about 1875 until, gosh, they ran until the Second World War. And these galas are all recorded, so you get lots of names popping up. They had these bizarre swimming competitions. I mean, when you think that these wee souls were sitting around in one of those flannel costumes that we saw a picture of earlier, they were taking part in all sorts of, sort of straight speed races, egg and spoon races down the pool, all sorts of other things. And then, of course, when the swimming competitions first started, F.W. Allen, one of the founders, was the sponsor. He wasn't really interested in the wee dears swimming fast. He just wanted them to swim gracefully. So he gave a prize for graceful swimming. But there is that very rich archive. So, but the challenges, as Lucy says, sometimes you're on the thread of a story and you're so convinced that there's something there. Yeah. Everything just dries up. You can't get anything at all, no matter what search you try. And then suddenly, Thomas Steele Anderson I was getting nothing at all till this description of his funeral in Calcutta had popped up. So it's endlessly fascinating if you're into that sort of thing.
I'd say one of the greatest challenges was obviously most of this research was done during lockdown, actually full lockdown. So we couldn't get access to a lot of the archive that's in the Mitchell. And like Eunice says, the ladies' archive is actually better preserved than the men's archive in terms of the books. So most of this is actually research that is in the public record on the internet. So it's all sorts of things like Scotland's People and Ancestry.com, newspapers where we could find it. And like Eunice says, you would get to a point where you think you've made a massive breakthrough, and then it either gets pulled away from you or you get this deluge of information that you can't handle. I think the one that kind of got me was Archibald Caldwell, another one of our kind of distant members, who is pretty obvious the family were from Campbelltown. And tantalizingly, for a little bit, for a few days, and I was emailing Lucy back and forth going, oh, I think we've got the Caldwell steel magnet. And I was pretty certain that it was the Caldwell steel of Ravenscraig fame. But then it turned out he was actually another cotton spinner. And it became known as between Lucy and I as the Campbelltown Mafia. There seems to be this group in Campbelltown who basically ran whiskey, steel, and cotton, and they all... Is that where you're from? I never knew that.
That was the Campbelltown Mafia.
And I was in Campbelltown last September, and there's a fantastic exhibition in the museum there, and the Colvilles are in that, because obviously Colvilles were very big in whiskey, and I think the Colvilles we have are a branch of the whiskey branch, and another branch of the whiskey branch are the ones who went in to form Ravenscraig. So the kind of links between these groups of people are really quite close. But it would be nice to get in the Mitchell again and be able to pin down some of those closer.
I have some more information about the Colvilles from Campbelltown historian. It doesn't totally answer your question, but I think it gives you a bit more. I need to scan it and send it to you.
Right.
I think that happened quite a lot. You'd find a name and you'd be determined that they had to link in somehow. I mean, I found that as part of this Dalgleish research, there was a James Herps Dalgleish who was involved with the company down in Manchester, and he was obviously related to the main man Dalgleish, who we've talked about already. But I was just intrigued that his name was Herps, and I just thought that would be quite nice to discover that he was called after perhaps one of the Schwabs or one of the other families that were involved. One of the obviously such an obviously German name. There must have been some link with one of the other textile magnates down in Manchester, but I couldn't find out more. Eventually, we'll be able to uncover it all. But yeah, it's just these little snippets of information that you just get sidetracked by and takes you down a little rabbit hole for a while.
And I think one thing about, you were saying about the founders all being men, certainly all the shareholders weren't men, because I remember we've got some of the records have been digitized already before lockdown, and I'm sure there's some AGM meetings where they list women as shareholders. There's women who are represented, usually by men in proxy, but there are women shareholders, and it'd be interesting to get a list of the absolute shareholders, which I wonder if we could get somewhere. That'd be something I'd quite like to look at.
I see Warren was asking about the relationship between the Bass Company and the Bass Club. I don't know if this is a good point to explain how that worked.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, well, the Bass Company was formed in July 1870, on the 11th of July 1870, by a group of 7 Victorian gentlemen, as far as we know. They had met previously that there's some indication that there was a meeting in '69 between a couple of them, and they decided to meet and form a bath company that would construct a swimming pool in Arlington Street. But the company gets formalized and incorporated on the 11th of July 1870, and then they also form, so the Articles of Incorporation allow the company to also then seek the formation of a club who will effectively rent that accommodation from the company. So this was apparently quite a common technique for building public buildings at the time. So churches would be built this way. I think St Mary's on Great Western Road was built in a very similar way, where there would be a company that had then limited liability amongst the people who would buy the shares, and the congregation then would obviously rent back the church from that company. But in our case, the swimming clubs, the Arlington Swimming Club originally, would pay back each year some money for the rental of the club, and they would have to go through the process of asking the club at different periods during history for other facilities such as the Turkish or the gym or the billiard rooms. And in our archive you see this kind of almost looks like a fight, because they're requesting it and getting turned back because the company's saying there's not enough money, or we've got other priorities. But actually it's the same people mostly in the management committee of the swimming club that are in the shareholders of the company. So how they kind of reconcile that, I don't know. And the idea with this arrangement, the strange arrangement, was the shares worth of the company over time. So the value of the building will depreciate just like a car would depreciate. So as the swimming club raises revenue, it can buy back shares from the shareholders. And we get from 1871 then to 1921. And that's about the time that the price of the shares are so little that the company just buys the rest of them back in whole, and it becomes the Arlington Baths Club at that point, and they both come together. The name's been bandied about a wee bit before that, but we had the Arlington, so we had the Glasgow Swimming Company that built the baths. The Arlington Swimming Club that basically hired the baths was the progenitor of the club that is at the moment, and then they come together and form the Arlington Baths Club over time. And at that point, all the shares are kind of bought back from members, I think.
The other astonishing thing is that they formed the company in July 1870, and they opened the building on the 1st of August 1871.
Yeah.
I mean,
We're hanging about.
They obviously didn't have to deal with the city council planning regulations.
I guess they probably were the planning council planning regulations. So,
I mean, that's one of the reasons we don't have the original plans, because there was no planning department. It was the Wild West. Technically, it was completely the Wild West, and you didn't have to lodge plans with anybody. I think you just had to say, I've got an idea, I've got land, let's do it. In our case, worked out quite well, and we were really the only people on the site. Maybe the cottages behind us weren't too happy, but it didn't matter. I think it was possible they were bought from Dubs, weren't they? The land was bought from Dubs, who had the cottages. So he's probably quite happy. But the planning department doesn't come along for another 10, 12 years at least. And the Dean of Guild is where you would have lodged your plans at that point, and it also doesn't come along till later. So the original plans, wherever John Burnett's plans were, either lost in time or maybe in the mythical Arlington Baths in London that got bombed in the war, or somebody's got them under their bed somewhere, maybe a member.
It'd be wonderful if you turned up.
The treasurer was in the same building as Andrew Miles from the billiard room extension, and he always said there was a big old safe in that building that nobody had the keys for. And we're like, surely Andrew Miles must have had the original plans to say what I'm going to add to them. So that's our only hope, is that in a Bath Street building there might be some plans. But, no.
Yep. The other interesting thing is that you said that there was no planning authority then to check the plans, but because the idea of building an indoor pond was so new, they wouldn't have known what to ask or what to look for anyway. It was such a new thing.
Also, I think as Eunice said, it was basically only a year and a month since they incorporated the company. To construct our pool and the surrounding building in a year and a month must have been quite an endeavour, especially as there's no mechanical diggers. This was hand dug by people with spades, basically. And, probably there was people from the canals maybe we got down. They would seem the obvious, maybe navigators, but I still think it's quite astounding you could shift that amount of earth in that time and be pretty certain it was watertight.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting as well that it's all part of the kind of the growth of the West End. When you look at maps from that time, you can see how, as you say, there's a lot of fields, or there's just kind of a few buildings here and there, a few streets, and then it expands and expands, and more things grow and add more buildings, more facilities. There's Covent Grove Park and the University and the Baths and the Botanic Gardens, and all the streets start to get filled in with houses. And I suppose that's one of the things about the walk, is that it's trying to take you round sort of the streets that the founders would have walked down. Okay, they're not going to look exactly the same, but you can get a wee bit of a sense of what their lives perhaps would have been like, or the things they saw, from day to day, from visiting the Baths, going back to their house, and the streets that they would have seen. So hopefully that's something that people can get from the walk, is a wee bit of a sense of what it would have been like in Glasgow at that time.
So we've got a question here bringing us bang up to date. Do we have any known descendants of the founders who are still members?
There must be, but we don't know.
We don't
know.
It would be brilliant to.
If you're out there and you're a descendant of a founder, please make yourselves known.
On GDPR, we can't get the membership list. That's
quite an interesting research exercise as well, actually. It is not impossible. I was once asked a question in my professional life about the people who'd been vice-chancellors of the University of Madras and whether any of their descendants still alive. And I asked a former Deputy High Commissioner who was a part-time genealogist, and we actually did manage to work down from people using his genealogical skills and finding descendants. They happened to have a rather unusual set of names, which was helpful. So I'm not quite so sure how easy it would be to find an Anderson in Glasgow, but it's not an impossible research task.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that there are still Sloan. Well, I don't think there are any Sloans now involved in Alexander Sloan's accountants, but the firm still exists. And of course, Charles and Alexander Sloan were our first secretaries. So there are still connections with existing businesses, and that's another interesting way of doing the research. One person I'd quite like to make a link with is, I think I'm right in saying there was a chairwoman of the Arlington a few years ago whose surname was Bankier, which is quite an unusual name. And again, one of the Sloans married an Agnes Bankier. And it would be interesting to find out if there was a connection there. It wouldn't be impossible.
No, if you've got an unusual name, it's definitely easier.
So we need to get the Glasgow phone book, if they still print them, and look for Schwaber. All the Schwabers.
Yeah. We've got a question here from Marion saying, do you think they lived longer because they swam regularly? Were they fitter and healthier? Well, that's an interesting one. As far as the founders and the members of the management committee are concerned, I mean, we do know a little bit about how old they were when they died. One example that springs to mind is William Fleming, who was a surgeon and physiologist based initially at the Royal Infirmary and then latterly at the Western Infirmary. And he was a member of the management committee. He joined that when he was 22 of all ages. He was still an undergraduate at that point. But he died when he was 52 of prostate cancer. So back in those days, people still died of, the same things that we die of now. I would be doubtful that I'm sure they were fitter. I'm not sure that they necessarily lived longer, though.
The latest death of the dates of death that we know, the latest one was F.W. Allen, who died on the 15th September 1918, shortly after Robert Dalgleish, who died on 21st of February of the same year. And they were both, so I'm just looking at what age Robert Dalgleish was. So F.W. Allen would have been older because he was 38 in 1870. So he lived to quite a good age, so another 48 years. So he was 86 when he died. So he was about the oldest. Robert Dalgleish would have been 76.
But certainly some of them were very active. I mean, the Alexander Sloan, as well as his involvement with the Baths, he was involved with the skating club, Glasgow Skating Club and Curling Club. And there's a record to say that he walked from the West End to his city centre office and back every day. So that was about, probably he was walking at least 4 miles a day, in addition to all the sports he did. And he used to go out walking at weekends. So, some of them were really quite active. And the interesting thing certainly about the Sloans is they were from quite big families. I think from memory, there were about 10 of that generation of Sloans, and their parents also came from very big families. And all the children seem to have survived, which is quite unusual at that time.
Well, that's your answer. So, yes, swimming is good for you. Well,
that might be because we don't have Dr. Perry.
Well, that's true. Yes. There's been a murder.
Dr. Perry kept saying they were signing their death certificates, which I'm assuming he got money for.
Do you want to think a bit more about
if you read in those days? Probably, yes. Well, I'm conscious of the time. It's getting towards bedtime, and that's an hour. So I think we should wrap things up. I'm sorry if we've not answered all the questions, but I think we've managed most of them. It really just remains for me to thank the panel very much indeed for taking part tonight, and also to our listeners at home for contributing your comments and questions. You may be aware that we've got another live stream this coming Thursday at 4:00 in the afternoon, which will be coming from the baths themselves. And we're doing a video walkthrough, which we've pre-recorded, but we'll run the video, and then we've got a panel discussion after that with our very own Lucy and Will, and with Andrew McGilp, who's the general manager of the bars, who'll be on hand to answer any queries or questions about membership and facilities and so on. So please join us again on Thursday at 4:00 in the afternoon for the second instalment. If you've enjoyed this evening and found it interesting, then please comment in the box below and tell us. If you'd like us to do more of these, then we need to know. It's a new venture, obviously, so in these sort of difficult times with COVID and so on, we have to look at other ways of reaching our members and the general public. So if you have enjoyed it and you'd like to see more, please tell us. Finally, remains to thank the panelists tonight, Kay, Lucy, Will, and Eunice, and wish you all a very good night. See you on Thursday.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John,
Thank
for
you very much,
organising
John.
this. So.
Good night.